Well, I think the Institute has tried very hard over the years to align itself to the objectives of ASEAN, and in particular, the imperative of building, fostering, and cultivating this ASEAN community. And I think to the large part, ASEAN-IPR has been successful, and I've been very honored and very privileged to be part of that process, to partake in that journey, to try to foster and strengthen ASEAN community. I think the whole idea of creating an ASEAN community is not just in terms of alignment or efforts to try to better align the perspectives of member states. But equally important, I think, is the dynamics that is created, cultivated, and carefully nursed among the leaders and the peoples of the ASEAN states. And I think ASEAN-IPR has played a very important role in both these respects. I mean, personally, for me, I'm not someone who I'm not a career diplomat. So when I came into it, what struck me was the camaraderie, among the representatives of the member states, and the very obvious, very palpable sincerity that everyone had and everyone showed to really try to come together and address and think through some of the challenges that ASEAN faces, which ASEAN-IPR was created to address. So I think, this particular ASEAN organization has done a very commendable job, and we should, pat ourselves on the back for that. Well, I think the first thing we need to recognize about ASEAN-IPR, and indeed about ASEAN itself, is that we are still very much a work in progress, right? With ASEAN as an institution and Southeast Asia, which it represents as a region, we have come very far. We've come very far from the early days of ASEAN, right? The late 1960s, or even before that, in the build-up to ASEAN. And I think first and foremost, we should not lose sight of how far we've come. Yeah, that's not to say that our work is complete, but it's important that we have that foundational understanding. Then that leads me to my second point. What are the key areas that ASEAN-IPR could and should be focused on in order to sort of reflect and to align with the vision of the leaders? I think the whole idea of ASEAN-IPR, I believe, was to create a regional platform for regional states to talk about some of the issues related to the stability of the region, right? I mean, we've come very far, but of course we should not pretend that we are a perfect region or perfect organization. There are still challenges that many member states face within their borders, and there are challenges that we face regionally as well. I mean, you just think about the changing geopolitical landscape that we are on, right? The kind of developments over the last few years between the two great powers, China and the US, and there's so many other aspects to this changing dynamics. We need to, as ASEAN-IPR, we need to remind ourselves about how important it is to at least be able to have a candid discussion on these issues. We may not come up with the solutions, right? Sometimes having the solutions requires us to work with other parties, possibly even external parties, or work with ASEAN proper, the organization proper. But for ASEAN-IPR, having that discussion, I think, is quite critical. Having a climate where we are prepared to have those discussions candidly, honestly, not as an effort to undermine our neighbors, but really to just bring different perspectives and share different perspectives. I think that is the value add that ASEAN-IPR can bring to the larger regional effort. And I think our leaders and in the context of ASEAN, they would be, I suspect they will be very appreciative if ASEAN-IPR can play that role. And we have been trying to do that. So I think that is commendable. Well, I think those of you who were involved in the process, especially in the early years, you remember that we spent quite a bit of time in the early years just trying to sort of pin down the terms of reference and making sure that it's clear and operational, or in a sense, operational in the sense that we as ASEAN-IPR could use the terms of reference to initiate very practical measures, in a number of areas. Those were very interesting times, because it required, first and foremost, that everyone in ASEAN-IPR, whether in the governing council or in the advisory board, try to be on the same page, right, in terms of our understanding of what the terms of reference were telling us, because it'll be a problem if we're not. So that process was a very important one, but it was a very encouraging and actually a very edifying one as well, because you could really see that everyone was sincere in putting the effort to come to a common understanding of the role and purpose of ASEAN-IPR. And then after that, it became trying to pin down a number of more concrete initiatives and programs. And a number of things came out of that, right? In particular, for example, how the Philippines was very keen to share their experience of in the early years of ASEAN-IPR, still the unfolding process of with the Bangsamoro, the Manila government and the Bangsamoro movements, the fact that the Philippines was prepared to sort of lay it on the table for ASEAN-IPR to look at the difficulties, the challenges, and how they were overcome. I think that provided very useful lessons for ASEAN-IPR and the member states. And then there were other initiatives which, as it turns out, were very important. Indonesia was at the forefront, very forward-leaning on youth and radicalization, or rather de-radicalization. I think Indonesia was very well placed to lead the charge there, and did a fantastic job. The number of events you will recall surrounding that. And another thing was the role, the gender roles and the role of women in particular in conflict, which was an experience that the Philippines was prepared to share as well. That also, I think, was very useful. And also, when ASEAN-IPR realized that it would be useful to tap into the research expertise that every member state has, that, to me, I thought was very important as well, because rather than reinvent the wheel and just create another entity, the member states already had a lot of very good research institutions and organizations doing very important work. The fact that ASEAN-IPR tried to provide another platform to bring this work and to bring these organizations together, I thought was very important. These sorts of things take time, so it unfolded over a few years. But I believe if you keep in mind the long term, it provides a very important foundation on which to build the future of ASEAN IPR on. Well, first and foremost, I think ASEAN IPR should be commended for recognizing the role of women and the role of youth in conflict resolution. Yeah, it's not often recognized enough, and I'm delighted to see Southeast Asia and ASEAN IPR really at the forefront of according that necessary acknowledgement and recognition of the roles of these communities in conflict resolution, and even more so the fact that in the Philippines example and in the Indonesian example, there are very concrete indicators of the kind of roles that these communities can play. And Manila and Jakarta were very forthcoming in sharing their experiences in there. So I think that is very important. Going forward, I think there are a number of ways that personally I feel ASEAN IPR can start to expand the scope that they've already, the foundation of which they already have. So one example is managing, the roles and the place of minority groups, for example. Yeah? So not just gender issues, but even, in the case of many countries in Southeast Asia, not all, but many countries in Southeast Asia, there are still this residual tensions between different, ethnic linguistic groups, and it has always been a challenge for any given Southeast Asian nation state to foster the sense of national identity, to bring together these groups. But as it turns out, if you look across Southeast Asia, the different countries in the region, your neighbors, our neighbors, all have similar kind of challenges. They may not be exactly the same, but similar. Yeah. So what that suggests to me is that it would be perhaps very useful for policy making, for people, for member states to be able to share their experiences. And if that is the case, then again, something like ASEAN IPR can provide a very good platform for that to be done in a very careful, calibrated, but a candid manner as well. So moving ahead, this will be one area that I hope ASEAN IPR can look at. Another area, I think it is so much more important today than ever that the member states of ASEAN realize that we are basically all in the same boat. If you look at the larger picture of developments, whether it's geo-economic, whether it's geopolitical, there are forces out there moving about that are beyond the capacity and ability of any individual member state to tackle and to deal with, So having that strength in numbers, I think, helps. But creating that strength in numbers requires us to be able to not just share our perspectives, but increasingly find commonalities between us. And again, an outfit like ASEAN IPR, I think, plays a very important role in such an effort. Yeah. So I hope that it will continue to do so.